everyone. Welcome to Paraprofessional Counseling. Today we're going to discuss theories and tasks. We're going to review theories that are used a lot in counseling, go over some of them in basic format. We're going to do very cursory examination of theories just to kind of give you guys an introduction of what they are and how they're used. Now, this is a fairly advanced thing to talk about for Parapro 1. A lot of you won't really get to thinking about theories or really get into learning about them until well into your bachelor's degree or even your master's degree. However, the reason that I'm covering them is, one, because we're already using theories, and two, because they do help set the groundwork and the structure for a lot of what you're going to be doing going forward. The Egan book has us use a lot of specific theories already. The stages that we'll learn, 1, 2, and 3, are grounded in theory. A lot of the things that we learn about doing or not doing with clients are already grounded in theory. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend a little bit of time just kind of reviewing some of the most basic ones. By no means does this cover all of the theories available. This is really just some of the big ones. And again, I'm really just doing a cursory look at this, so this is not going to be super in-depth into theories as either. This is really just hopefully an introduction, and what I'd like you to do as we discuss the different theories is to think which one best suits you. What you will most likely find is that you're kind of stuck between a couple different ones, but I want you to push yourself and pick one theory that you think is, if you had to choose one, which one suits you the best. Just in order to kind of start really owning who you are as a helper, and start thinking about ways in which your theories and things that you agree with for how people work influence how you serve people. Now, again, if you want to pursue this field, I would encourage you, pick one or two of these theories and then learn more about it, and you can find some more subtleties. But the ones we're going to discuss are the big umbrella theories, meaning that there's a lot of other theories that fall under these, but these are kind of the big ones. Again, we're not going to go into super in depth. We're just kind of shine a light to say, hey, here they kind of are, and here's kind of what they look like. So one of the first things that we need to think about is, what do theories tell us? Why are we wasting our time, right? Are we wasting our time? Is this useless, or why is this valuable? So what do theories tell us? So they tell us what people are. They give us an explanation for that. And people think that people are different things. Some people think that people are evolved, and they're evolved from primordial goo, and they don't really have a purpose or an end goal. It's really all about survival. Well, that really changes things. Some people believe people are created by God with a divine purpose and reason. Well, that certainly changes how you're going to look at people. Some people believe that we're all one in reality and there's no individuality. Again, that changes how you look at people. So one of the first things that theories gives us is not necessarily a religion, but what it gives us is ultimately, what are people? And how should people be interacted with? Should people be told what to do? Do people just need to be told, hey, you do this? Should people be just worked with? They have the answers themselves. We just need to help them kind of come up with the answers. Do people need to be gently guided? How do people need to be worked with? Why do people have problems? Do people have problems because they're inherently flawed and they're just going to screw up everything anyway? Or people, do they have problems because their childhoods were really bad and they got to get over whatever happened in their childhood because that's the reason that they have problems? Do people have difficulties because the world is disjointed, and so what they really just need to do is find a way to make the world get back in sync somehow? There's a whole bunch of different answers to this question, but those are just some examples. And then how do people address these problems? So, for example, what's the remedy? What's the way in which people go about solving these problems? Okay, so we've talked about where the problems come from, but how do they solve them? Do they solve them with money? Do they solve them with love? Do they solve them with self-acceptance? I mean, how do they solve them? And then what are some effective mechanisms to utilize in helping? So this would be some of the nuts and bolts stuff that we've already spent a lot of time with. Is it effective to let people talk? Is it effective to stop people and tell them when they're wrong? Is it effective to, use free association, Rorschach? I mean, what things are going to be effective? Okay, So psychoanalytic is the first one we're talking about, though psychoanalytic we often associate with Freud. It's oftentimes kind of the modern reiteration of psychoanalytic is psychodynamic now. Does not have everything in common with it. It has quite a bit, though, and does have its origins in psychoanalytic. But you might hear that term psychodynamic a lot more now today, and just know that is a descendant of psychoanalytic theory. It'd be under that umbrella. Now, in psychoanalytic, this is where we get that classic, patient laying on the couch and talking to the therapist. That's where that model comes from. It's Freud. And the reason he had people do that is, the person would be laying on the couch and they would not be looking at the helper. And what that would allow them to do is they would just project their thoughts and their feelings on the blank slate of the helper. So this is where we get the term transference. So what Freud was really wanting to happen was transference to happen. He was wanting the person who had the problems to look at the helper a certain way, to transfer how they were seeing people a certain way to the helper, such as maybe the person always had a contentious relationship with her father. Her father was always judging her. And so then what this client does is he transfers those thoughts and those feelings about her father to the clinician, and then he's able to understand and help and work through her transference because he's made himself a blank slate because she's not even looking at him, right? So his expressions, his facial expressions, all that is can't be seen by her. So what she's doing is a lot of the interpretation of how this person is feeling is going to be coming from her, which is, again, the transference. There's also some belief about laying down, opening the minds, and things like that. And Freud was very connected to sex and dreams and other things like that have some connection. Okay, so again, psychoanalytic, right? Freud was very much concerned with the unconscious material. He was very much concerned with unconscious motives. So these are things, again, that we're not aware of. He was very big into exploring the past, kind of the cliche of it's all my mother's fault. That kind of comes from psychoanalysis. And so again, as we talked about, the therapist is distant from the client. Even the setup, right? The setup is really different than what we practice in parapro, right? The therapist is purposefully distant from the client. And then again, this is where we get transference and countertransference. So transference, right, is when the client projects upon the therapist. Countertransference is when the therapist projects upon the client. So for instance, if this client reminded the therapist of his little sister whom he couldn't help, and she died at a young age, and so he feels very much that he really has to help her and save her, that would be countertransference. So next we have behaviorism. Behaviorism, here you got a little picture, right? Stop thinking and just do it. Behaviorism is, not surprisingly, about behavior. Yeah, you got it. Very much interested in problem solving, very practical. Current problems in life. Behaviorism is not really interested in the past very much, or at all. In fact, it might see, spending too much time or any time really talking about the past is kind of a scapegoat because you can't do anything about the past. You need to focus on what you can do now. Also very much focused, again, on the coping skills and this action, right? What can you do now? What can you get done? The relationship between the counselor and the client is not central. In fact, it's downplayed a lot. Because again, what's really focused here is the client doing, the client getting stuff done. Just make it happen. And again, not surprisingly, behaviorism is very focused on behavior change. So behaviorism is this really big umbrella. There's lots of under that umbrella. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, would be under that umbrella. And of course, cognitive behavioral therapy has the aspect of the cognitions, the thoughts, as well as just the behaviors. And behaviorism is typically more directive, meaning that the counselor is typically more directive of the client. Not as much following their lead all the time as kind of saying, okay, here's what we're going to do now. Okay, here's what we're going to do now. Okay, here's what's going to happen. Okay, here's what's going to happen now. It's a lot more counselor-led. Humanism, oftentimes called client-centered or person-centered. And here you got this little, I can do it on my own bubble. Okay. There is a very big emphasis on the counselor-client relationship in humanism. It's considered very, very important in humanism. So developing a good rapport is a very important first task in humanism. It is indeed client-centered, so the client should be the one leading, the client should be the one directing where things go. A fundamental belief of humanism is that people tend towards healing. If we could just get the things, the obstacles, the other, maybe their faulty beliefs and things like that out of their way, negative people, etc., etc. If we could just help them get those things out of their way, they would naturally, on their own, tend towards healing. Carl Rogers did a lot to develop and encourage humanism, and his theory, Rogerian, which is called Rogerian, is probably one of the biggest humanistic theories right now. It's not the only one, but it's certainly, I would say, the biggest. A lot of what we do in Parapro 1, Parapro 2, what we read about in the Egan book, even some of what Nichols talks about is going to be, maybe it's not strictly speaking Rogerian, but it has a lot of Rogerian basis. Okay, so existentialism. There will be some argument among some people about whether or not this is actually a counseling theory, and I would say it's not. It's not a counseling theory. However, the reason I have it in here is because I still think it's used often enough as a counseling theory, and it still influences counseling enough that I think it's very important to know about. Technically, it's a philosophy, not a theory. It was developed by philosophers, not by clinicians, not by people in the field of psychology. But again, it's had such a big impact, and it is, in a lot of places, treated as a theory, so I think it's important for us to look at it that way for a little bit. So again, existentialism is all about what does it mean. Kierkegaard and also some Nietzsche they were 1800s philosophers, and they're kind of the big names associated with developing existentialism. Existentialists believe that the problems that we face in our life all go back to the meaning that we are ascribing to those problems. So maybe my problem isn't as much that I have difficulty maintaining stable relationships. Maybe my problem is that in actuality, maintaining a stable relationship means that I'm a worthwhile person, and being a worthwhile person is something that's really, really important to me, so I'm putting so much emphasis on this, maintaining a stable relationship, because it means I'm a worthwhile person. Well, that's not really what it means anyway, right? The ultimate problem that I'm facing goes back to the meaning that I am ascribing to the thing, and not the thing itself. Each individual must find their own meaning, so not only in specific situations, but for the purpose of life. Existentialists really take a very big view of life. What is the purpose of it all? Why are we bothering living this life? There's so much pain. Why are we bothering? So existentialists really ask the tough questions. Kierkegaard was a Christian existentialist. He believed that the reason to live was to glorify God, and so everything was looked at through that ultimate lens of life being about glorifying God. Nietzsche was he was very fatalistic, so he believed there's nothing after death, nothing really matters. You can become your own God, the Supermensch, the Superman, right? Who no laws, no rules. He can do no morality applies to him. He can do whatever he wants. He's free from all constraints. That's Nietzsche. So they were both fathers, if you will, of existentialism, but they had very, very, very different meanings to which they ascribed. Very different reasons to live life. There is a very big emphasis placed upon the human condition and difficulties that come along with being humans, and not looking away from those difficulties. Not thinking, oh, let's think happy thoughts right now. Let's not think about when you die. No. There's a very big emphasis placed on let's stare those things that most people try to look away from. Let's stare them dead on and try to make some peace, try to drive some meaning, try to figure out what we really believe about them. And existentialism is oftentimes looked more as a philosophical quest, rather than, again, like a treatment modality per se. There are a lot of techniques and such that go into the use of existentialism, but again, it's by and large looked at as, this exploration of who you are, asking these important questions. And again, it's not really well-defined theory or therapy, and that's really on purpose because it's not that. It is a philosophy. Now, it doesn't mean you won't find a whole bunch of books about existentialism in the counseling section of bookstores and things like that. And again, that's where that kind of, is it not? And again, I would say technically it's not really a theory, but for the purposes of right now, we're going to kind of consider it one just because of its influence and how it's used. So some other purposes of a theory to think about. One, they can help be grounding, right? They give us a place to start. They can help be guiding, right? Because they can also give us some direction of where to go. Okay, well, I'm not just going to, we're not just sitting and talking and randomly maybe some stuff comes up. I'm an existentialist, so we're going to specifically talk about a meaning. We're going to explore that. Or I am a psychoanalyst. So we're going to specifically look into your childhood and we're going to talk about that. Or I am a behaviorist, so we're going to really talk about what are you doing, right? So it can be very guiding in what you're doing in your sessions. It can be very helpful in assessment because, again, each different theory gives a different reason for why people are broken and how people are fixed. This is going to give you areas to focus on in your assessment. It's going to give you areas that you believe are more or less meaningful for the person's overall success. And then going with the overall success thing, this will also help you know, like when you project if somebody's going to have a full recovery or how long it's going to take them. It's going to take them 6 months of treatment or 2 months of treatment or whatever. The theory that you use is going to help you very much in establishing that guess that you have. It can also help you work with differences in clients' cultures and other issues if you really understand your theory. Because if you really understand your theory, you can understand how it's going to work better with some clients than others. It's going to work better with some cultures than others. It's going to work better with some issues than others. It doesn't necessarily mean you have a different theory for each culture, each client, each issue. But what it means is that you understand that it's maybe more readily suited to some. And so if you're dealing with one that's maybe not the easiest one for it, you know you're going to have to tweak it, or you know you're going to have to change it or refine it or something like that. And you know that going into it rather than just trying to force the same exact thing on every single person, every single client you encounter. Again, it doesn't mean you have to change your theory every time. It means when you understand your theory really well, you understand how to change it. And some will need to be changed more for different people groups. Some will need to be changed less for other people groups. And then also sharing the reason why. So you can actually tell your client, why are we doing the things we're doing? If things have been working, why are they working? If things haven't been working, why are they working? Instead of you just throwing questions out there and just like taking a shot in the dark all the time and just kind of muddling around trying to figure your way out, no, you're actually able to explain to them what you're doing, why you're doing it, where you're going, where you hope to wind up, how you hope to get there. You're able to give them these pieces of information because you're not just guessing. You're not just like, oh yeah, let's just talk till whenever. You know, maybe something will dawn on us that'll help you out. No. That's not what you're doing. You have this roadmap if you know your theory well. Okay, so before we move on to that briefly, talking about some other helping skills, I want to share something. So there's a real trend nowadays, people calling themselves eclectic, and eclectic oftentimes means just I'm everything. I just kind of pick and choose from all these different theories, and I just kind of pick whichever one works for me. And I would strongly discourage you to not become eclectic for a couple different reasons. One, people that are eclectic typically do not know any theories very well. They know a tiny little bit about a whole bunch of different theories, and they're not really able to apply very well any one theory because they don't know it very well. So I would encourage you to choose 1 or 2 theories and get to know them very well. Get to know them like you can use them. You understand them. You really understand them inside and out, and so man, you can use them. And then if you want, pull techniques from some other theories, because techniques are just, what you do, like Gestalt. It uses an empty chair technique where maybe, let's say, somebody's having a problem talking to their father. You would pull an empty chair and they'd have a conversation with their father as if they were there. Well, that's a Gestalt technique, but that's a Gestalt technique that you could incorporate into existentialism, right? So if you know one or two theories really, really well, you're going to understand how they fit together. Not all theories fit together. You're going to have a hard time making person-centered, right, humanists and behaviorists fit together. Not to say that there aren't some little aspects that could possibly go together, but a lot of them are going to disagree with each other. They have very different views of people, how people work, and how you help people. So it's going to be very difficult to say that you're a behaviorist who's a humanist, right? It's going to be very difficult. So you need to get to know one or two theories. If you pursue really doing counseling, that becomes a big part of what you do. Now, certainly, if you stay around like the paraprofessional level, then probably what you know from Egan and Nichols and the things that we've covered, it will probably suit you just fine. But I would encourage you, if you're going to do any more, if you really want counseling to be something that you focus on, and it's really an area of specialty for you, especially if you're looking into getting your master's or your doctorate in the field, I very much encourage you, pick one, two theories, learn a lot about them, learn how to use them expertly, instead of just learning a tiny little bit about a whole bunch and you just throw together willy-nilly whatever feels right in the moment. Don't do that. That's not professional. That's what a lot of people do. They call themselves eclectic, and a lot of times they can't really tell you why they're doing what they're doing because they don't fully understand the theory behind the technique that they're using. So some basic helping skills, just kind of as a review of some things, kind of bring some things together here. We got listening. We've spent a lot of time talking about listening, right? Listening is important, and not many people do it. We all think we're better listeners than we are. Communicating, giving feedback, observing, confronting. Whew, okay, so when we communicate, it's important that we know to whom we are communicating. When we give feedback, we need to give feedback. We need to be willing to give that maybe not so positive feedback, but we need to know how to do it and when to do it, right? So those client self-challenges, we need to know how to do them in a way that they can be received, and we need to know when they're not needed, when not to do it, when to keep our mouth shut. It's not needed. Observing, remember way back to perspective taking, when we talked about how you need to observe all the information that you could, but you can't hold on to it all. So you're going to have to decide which ones you're going to hold on to, which pieces of information that you observe are you going to hold on to. So becoming a good observer is very important. And then again, confronting. Sometimes feedback might be confrontive, sometimes it's not. Knowing how to do confrontation appropriately and well is very important. Clarifying. Because we're going to misunderstand, right? We're going to misunderstand. We're going to want to make sure that we understand we're on the same page. We're going to need to do all those things. So clarifying is going to need to happen. So we can use reflection. We can use summarization. We can use those things, assumption testing, right? We can use those things to help us make sure, as much as possible, that we are taking accurately the perspective of our client. And then report writing. A lot of people hate this part. A lot of people hate this part. But notes is important. Taking good notes in a timely manner is very important. Notes are often how billable hours and sessions and stuff are done. And if they're not done in a timely manner and they're not done correctly, that can greatly impact an agency. And it can also reflect very, very poorly upon you. In several agencies I've worked at, many of the other counselors did not turn in their notes in a timely manner. And for me, you guys know me well enough, I think you'll believe this, I was always very particular to make sure that my notes were turned in on time and that they were done correctly. And I worked at several different agencies where there were prizes and things awarded to people for turning your notes in on time, and I almost always won them. Not because I was an exceptional person, not because I'm so awesome, but because I understood that getting notes in on time and getting them done correctly was important to the agency. It was my part to help the whole agency out. I couldn't just look at myself as this removed bubble. I had to do my part to help out the whole agency. Okay, So, one of the last big things we're going to talk about today is ethics. Now, something that will be talked about in other classes is ethics, and I will tell you right now that this is a term that I use differently than other professors, but I use it in a very specific way for the profession because I think it's very important that we understand that ethics, though the word is used interchangeably with like morality and right and wrong and beliefs out in the general world, it's very important that we recognize in the profession, when we're talking about ethics, we need to use that term specifically regarding the ethical standards that profession has come up with and written down, saying this is what you do to be ethical in this profession. So for example, the APA, the American Psychological Association, has written out ethical standards of how to be an ethical psychologist. You might disagree with some of those things that it says to do as an ethical psychologist. That would be a moral disagreement, not an ethical in the true, strict, professional sense of that word. I'm not using it in the philosophical sense. I'm using it in the professional sense. In the professional sense of the word, that would be a moral disagreement that you have, not an ethical agreement, because the organization gets to set the ethics for that profession. So for example, let's say that you are a member of a profession, and they say, let's say it's the ACA, the American Counseling Association, and they say, this isn't what they say, just so you know, this is just totally made up as an example. They say, under no circumstances can you ever have a client in your car, ever, under any circumstances. You can't ever do it. Can't have a client in your car, period, end of story, can't do it. If you do it, it's unethical because it's written in the ethical statement that you will not do that as an ethical counselor, right? Well, you get in a situation where one of your clients, it's negative 40 degrees, and you're in Fairbanks, and it's negative 40 degrees, and you see your client walking down the street, and they don't have a coat on, and you know that the bus that they're waiting for all by themselves, you know that bus is broken down and will be there for another hour, and there's no other car that's on that road, and you know that that client doesn't have a cell phone or a way to reach anybody else. So you're in this conundrum of, on one hand, I believe it's my moral obligation. If I leave this person stranded here, they may very well die at this temperature for that long without a coat. Yeah, not looking so good for them. On the other hand, ethically, I'm being told I can't have them in my car no matter what. So morally, I think I should pick them up. Ethically, I can't. Which one am I going to do? Am I going to choose to be moral by my own moral standard, or am I going to choose to be ethical by the ethical standards of my profession? So that's why ethics and moral are different, right? Okay, so now something to think about in the general ethics, but also in the this question is covered by pretty much every ethical standard of every profession you'll have. There's also a moral aspect to this question too. So I want you to think about this a little bit. We can talk about the ethical standards for the National Organization of Human Services. You guys should look those up and read those. You can find them online. But I also want you to think morally about what your stance is on this question. So is wanting to be in the profession enough? Should everyone be able to be in the profession who wants to be in the profession? So, for example, if there's somebody who has big anger problems and they yell at somebody every time they get frustrated, but they're trying really hard, does that mean they should be allowed to be a paraprofessional counselor? Or should we say, well, no, we have to balance the good out for the client? How do we do that? How do we decide when we're going to say, no, you can't continue in your program, no, you can't continue at this agency? How do we make those decisions? Right? Okay. So that's where we're going to end today, covering those different sections. I would encourage you, if you haven't already, think about the theory that you think fits you the best. I certainly expect that not one of them will suit everybody, or not even one will suit you totally. But which one suits you the best? Then maybe even think of a secondary one. And if you are interested in being in this field long term, I would encourage you, learn a little bit more about the one that you selected.